And good evening and welcome to the Friday Harbor Film Festival. And we're here in San Juan Island and we got some nice weather outside. It's a little dark at 9 o'clock, but it was a great movie. We're going to talk about The Short Life of Trouble. And When Short Life of Trouble, the new documentary from filmmaker Kelley St. Germain. It the life and immense influence of G. Kelley, this great film. Welcome, Kelley. Tell us how somebody.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? You were going in and out on me. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Probably bandwidth. Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into documentary.
Sure. My name is, as you mentioned, is Kelley St. Germain, and I actually live in Western North Carolina, right at what we call the coolest corner of North Carolina, where North Carolina meets Virginia and the state of Tennessee. Kind of historically a wild, rugged, isolated area. I'm not originally from here, but I've been living here for over 20 years, and it's right in the middle of the Blue Ridge, Appalachian Mountains, beautiful area. I've been making films for, I guess, about since 2010, 2011. I produced a history documentary series that for a regional television network on Appalachian history stories that won Best Local Content Series in the country in 2013. And after doing 40 episodes in that series, I moved to the internet and then doing documentaries on my own, and just been having a lot of fun. Love history. I'm a self-described history geek, and always looking for a good history mystery.
History mystery. I love it. Why this particular subject? I mean, a lot of people have never heard of this man. And now with this movie, it looks like he may have played a major role in the creation of bluegrass and country western.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was drawn to the story. It is the ultimate history mystery. Yeah, I heard about this man, about G.B. GRAYSON, probably 15, 16 years ago. But it wasn't until a friend of mine, Josh Beckworth, who we interview in the movie, wrote this book called Always Been a Rambler, where this is the most definitive story that is in existence about G.B. GRAYSON. He wrote that book. I read it, and I said, this needs to be in film. And the thing about G.B. GRAYSON is there's only 4 pictures of him in existence. He was never interviewed. There's no interviews because he was legally blind. He didn't write letters, so the documentary record, the primary sources don't exist. I mean, I call G.B. GRAYSON a ghost. And what stories that we have and the stories that Josh was able to find in his book are based on oral tradition, some of which he was able to verify. A lot of them, with many myths and legends, were not true. So it was a story that was supposed to be a 3-month, $6,000 project, and it turned into a 2.5-year, $20,000 project. It was we had to go to the ends of the earth to really try to unravel the story, because it's a real history mystery.
Who was your funding from?
So we got funding from a variety of sources, several foundations in the state of Tennessee, as well as the Tennessee state government, and then private sources as well.
Well, that's really good. They came in at the last minute, probably.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have a big following on. I started a nonprofit organization 4 years ago called Appalachian Memory Keepers, and we have almost 13,000 people that follow us there every day on Facebook, and they're great supporters and really help us do a lot of really cool things.
Why was the Appalachian region being so secluded from people the place where bluegrass and country started. Why not New York, California? Why is it that it's all centered there?
I think because of the people who settled this area were mostly Scotch Irish, that came down, once they landed in the ports, and they brought the music of Ireland and England, and in its, music that was everywhere in the United States, brought by settlers. But when they came to the Appalachian Mountains, they lived in these isolated valleys and hollers and places where change didn't come rapidly. And I think this music, where it changed and evolved in other parts of the country quite quickly, it lasted here for 200 years. And that's why a lot of those old tunes that, had disappeared, even in England, people came over from England in the 60s to learn, tunes that were authentic to their history, were still being played regularly here, and, all up and down the Appalachian Mountain range.
You made some great efforts at showing GB in black and white impressions, and both in a still and moving. I think you said earlier there just weren't that many photos of GB.
Four photos of him in existence. So, as a filmmaker, that's a real challenge. I mean, I have no TV footage of him. I have no interview footage of him. So, my challenge was, how do I interject him into this movie?
Right.
And kind of the, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but kind of in a sense, a gimmick was to have an actor dressed up as him, walking, which is how he really got around everywhere, walking through my documentary just like he walked through life, and making it black and white to try to, in some form or fashion,
to make it look older,
give a sense of GB Grayson.
Well, you did that really well, because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have had I forgot what you call it in the filmmaking, but that was a necessary part of it. And he wasn't trying to be that person. He was simply, I saw him emanating that silhouette, the body style. His head was always down. It wasn't a facial thing. I think you really did that well.
Well, thank you. That's the first time he's ever acted, so to speak. And he's a friend of mine that I, with a lot of documentary and low budget filmers, you recruit your friends to be in the movie. And so I recruited Scott, and he did a great job. We talked with Josh and tried to, GB Grayson was legally blind, but we came across stories that he could see to a degree. I don't know if he had cataracts or what, but looking down, and he could see, and he could walk everywhere. I mean, for legally blind, he, nobody took him anywhere. He got on the train, he rode it, he walked roads and paths, and so yeah, that's kind of what we were trying to give a sense of that in the film.
Somewhere on your site, it said that he was able to find the change that people would throw into the hat or on the ground. So
yeah, that was an oral story from an oral interview that Josh did, that he told us about, that it was quite common after a performance. He bussed everywhere. He played anywhere he could get a venue, often in people's houses and in train depots, up at the coal fields of West Virginia. They used to. He and another famous musician who went on to have a long career and got discovered in the 1960s, Tom Ashley, would take him. They'd ride the train from Mountain City, Tennessee, all the way up into West Virginia, and they would stand outside the pay shack on Fridays when the miners got paid, and they would play there, and also in bars in the area, and people would throw dimes or nickels or even pennies on the stage after a performance, and we had an eyewitness account of a guy talking about that, how GB was able to, again, looking straight down, was able to find change on the stage.
Where did you find those historical black and white videos? Because you had some videos that I have no idea where you would have found those.
So we found those in a lot of different places. Some of them in the archives of Appalachia, which are housed at East Tennessee State University. We found them on some stock sites, historical archive sites that we purchased on the internet. So they really came from a wide variety of different places.
How did Fiddlers Convention, how did it change the history of professional musicians? You know,
So
when was it held and what was it called?
So the Fiddlers Conventions were kind of a cultural explosion that happened in the mid to late 20s in this area, and it's the most important one in this area it's called the Bristol Sessions, which happened in 1927 in Bristol, Tennessee. And that's kind of, if you watch the Ken Burns documentary on country music that aired last year, that's kind of where the explosion, where the big bang came of country music, and a lot of, the Carter family was discovered along with several other people. But 2 years before that occurred a Fiddlers Convention in tiny Mountain City, Tennessee, which was about 10 miles from G.B. Grayson's house. And we don't have exact records, but the oral tradition says he won that Fiddlers Convention and got a $50 gold piece. And he was playing against some of the most famous people of the time that had come there, because $50 was a big payday back then.
Like
and had come from throughout the South. And Fiddlers conventions were a way where people came together. It was basically a music contest with big crowds. One in our area, held on top of a mountain called White Top Mountain, Virginia, was so big and so famous. I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, but Eleanor Roosevelt came down, I think in 1932 or 33, and was literally carried to the top of this mountain for a Fiddlers Convention. And it's amazing. And they still exist today, but they're probably not as big or as many of them as there were back in the 20s and 30s.
So Tennessee is where country music was born and not Nashville.
Definitely the roots of it are found in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia, Southwest Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, kind of in this border. Where I'm sitting right now, I've been told by several people that 90% of all musicians, of studio musicians that play in Nashville, are came from a 50-mile radius of where I'm living right now. It's a very rich musical area.
Wow. You illustrated that one of the musicians during that meeting installed a small radio transmitter and did a live broadcast of a minimum power AM radio signal. The signal went as far as Boone, North Carolina, and the people listened in and then made phone calls to the hotel where they were playing and would make actual requests for songs. Mountain City, Tennessee, and Boone, North Carolina was the start of interactivity. I mean, think about it. That was the first social network.
It really was. And it's very similar to how the Grand Ole Opry got started almost at the same time in Nashville. But the guy that set this little radio station up, and it only lasted for the length of the convention, so less than a week, was in a band called the Hillbillies. And the Hillbillies' claim to fame is they're the first music act that was ever on TV. On TV in like 1929, I think, 28. The Hillbillies, that's their claim to fame.
I'll be darned. So the song to the title of this documentary, a couple of words. It says, a short life of trouble, a few more words to part. Short life of trouble, dear girl, for a boy with a broken heart. Remember what you promised, not more than a week ago. You promised that you'd marry me standing in your mama's door. What was that about, do you think?
Most all those old ballads like that are about true love, life, death, tragedy, love, the power of love, the power of death. those themes weave through all these old songs. And a
That,
lot of them, again, have roots going back to Ireland and England. And, each generation would change the words a little bit, but you can kind of see that continual thread that goes all the way back hundreds of years.
this is true history.
It is.
How important do you think the radio was to the spread of these professional museums, where before they would just, like you were saying, play in a cornfield, and now here comes the record industry. This guy started the record industry.
I think that even the people that owned the radio stations were shocked at how fast radio blew up an industry that only got started in like 1923, 1922 maybe was kind of the time period. I mean, it blew up so fast. And people did, those early radio owners and record executives, the first records that were ever put out were of more orchestra music and more opera music. The first radio star was really opera. And they were shocked that this quote unquote hillbilly music became huge so quickly. I mean, it blew them away, but it was because it was relatable music dealing with, four chords and the truth, as an old country music saying, that people responded to it, and, careers were created overnight. G.B. Grayson, before radio would not be known today. I mean, he was important in the local area here. He influenced a lot of musicians. Even today, you can see the thread. But radio changed everything. He sold hundreds of thousands of records in 2 years. He produced a legacy, 32 songs that are still played today by the biggest names. I mean, Mick Jagger has recorded a G.B. Grayson song, Handsome Molly. It's nuts. Radio was a game changer.
Who was the actor that did that walking?
Scott Ballard.
Scott Ballard.
Yep.
The voice of the moderator in the beginning was so seasoned. I mean, it was so perfect to go with that opening. Where'd you find that voice?
He's again, my comment earlier. You get all your friends to help you in your movies, and his name is Ed Spivey, and he is a builder contractor. And I've admired his voice for years. And I've told him, I'm going to use you one of these days. And he's like, yeah, right. Wasn't really excited about the idea. I mean, he's a very humble man, a builder, builds incredible homes. But that voice, to me, is the voice of the mountains.
He really, really has it. He could really go places with that voice.
Yeah.
Tell us about Tom Dooley. What's the story on that man? But it's not Dooley. It was Dooya or
Dooley. Tom
Dooley.
Yeah. So he was, that's a topic for hopefully my next movie. But in short, how he influences this film, talking about history and the coincidences of history. He was arrested for the murder of a woman named Laura Foster in Wilkes County, North Carolina, which is about 20 miles from where I'm sitting tonight. He was a Civil War veteran that came back home, got caught in a lover's tryst. It's a big mystery whether he was the one that murdered Laura Foster or the spurned third partner, Ann Melton, whether she killed her. We don't know for sure, but he was convicted, and right before he was arrested, he fled Wilkes County, planning on heading out west and getting away, so to speak. And he got caught just over the Tennessee line in Johnson County by he had just gotten a new pair of boots that had blistered his feet, and he was soaking his feet in a mountain creek, easing his blisters, when, and lo and behold, this is a coincidence, a man and a couple of hired hands, deputies, came up to arrest him. And the man that arrested him was a Major Grayson, who it turns out was GB's uncle, who was a Union cavalryman. And And so there's a lot of different versions of the Tom Dooley song that are floating around these mountains. G.B. Grayson didn't write the song. The song had been floating around, this area for probably 50 years. And then, but G.B. Grayson was the first one to record it. And, it became one of the biggest hits when the Kingston guys recorded it. It's one of the greatest pop songs ever recorded. But that coincidence of it being his uncle, and so the version that he sings is very pro-union. It indicates, or basically says, that GB, or that Tom Dooley was a guilty scumbag, that he was guilty of it, whereas other versions you hear in this mountain are much more sympathetic to him. So it's fun to listen to the differences.
Met her in the valley. There I took her life. That was part of it?
Yeah.
I remember that growing up. It's amazing.
Yeah.
He never spoke of a girlfriend or a wife. Was he married?
He was married, and he had, I believe, 5 children. And but we have no pictures of his wife. One of his sons, we do have some movie footage, and is actually in my documentary, where a grandson interviewed in, I think it was 1970, interviewed some of the kids. But the kids were all so young when he died that, they didn't really know him very well. And the grandkids know him even less. That, again, they have no papers, no pictures. It's really kind of sad.
Yeah. Why do you think GB played his fiddle like nobody else did, mounted on his chest instead of under his chin?
I think several reasons. One of the reasons is, as best as we can tell, he was completely self-taught. We can't find anybody that taught him how to play. He was a musical genius. I mean, I really think that, he could play a lot of different instruments, and he just picked them up and taught himself how to play them. And then also, it's really rare, if you know a lot about music and about fiddle playing specifically, it's really hard to play a fiddle and sing lead at the same time. G.B. Grayson could do it. And I think he was aided by that, by, instead of having the fiddle up under his chin, playing it like this would be hard to sing, he stuck it down here. We have pictures of it. And so then he could just, sing and play naturally. And his voice, if you listen to contemporaries, his voice is so much cleaner and almost more professional sounding, but almost more modern sounding than any of his contemporaries. And that's the big tragedy. He died on the edge of superstardom. If he hadn't died so tragically, a lot more people would know about him today.
So I know the story, or at least from your video, of how he died, but can you tell us how he died so prematurely and what exactly happened?
Yeah, it was really, I mean, it's really a tragic story. He had, he was an orphan. He was orphaned at age 15 and was dirt poor, literally. And even after he got married, they had nothing. And he had this 2 years of recording, 1927 to 29. He had just gotten in 1930 a big, for that time, royalty check. And for the first time ever, he was going to a town about 20 miles away to pay a man to buy a house, the first house that anybody in his family or he had ever owned. This was a momentous time. This is what he'd been working so hard for. And so he went and paid the man, and then was supposed to catch a ride back home the next day. He spent the night in this town called Damascus, Virginia, which is home today of the world famous Creeper bicycle ride, which is incredible. I get sidetracked. So he was supposed to come back home the next day. His ride never showed. A neighbor that he knew came by and said, hey, Bandman, because he never went by GB during his whole life. He never went by GB. He was known as Bandman, which was his middle name, Bandman Grayson. And he said, this fella, Curtis Milhorn, said, "You want to ride?" And he said, "Sure." Because, you know, he didn't know if his other ride was ever going to get there. But the problem was it was a car, it was a coupe that was already full with people. There was no room for him to get inside the car. So he handed his fiddle case in, and then he rode on the running boards, holding on to the edge of the car. So really dangerous. And, you know, we don't know exactly what happened other than the driver of the car going on a bridge out of Damascus. There were windy, curvy mountain roads, was driving recklessly. I don't know if he was trying to impress, you know, the kids or the people in the car, or, you know, goofing off or something, but it had tragic consequences, because coming out of a bridge, they met a logging truck, and evidently didn't hit it head on, but sideswiped it enough where GB Grayson went flying off the running boards, you know, outside of the car where he'd been holding, went through the windshield of the logging truck. As he went through the logging truck, a pack of cigarettes in his pocket fell on the seat. The logging truck didn't have any doors, side doors. So GB went through the windshield, went through the side door, and landed in the creek. He was alive until he got taken to a hospital about 20 minutes away, but he was pronounced dead there. And it was a completely tragic end of, you know, a career that could have been truly historic. You know, his family was shattered. Their primary breadwinner was gone. As a result, the family had to sell the house that he had just bought, and mostly they scattered. You know, work was for cash money. If you didn't own your own farm, there wasn't much work in this area during that time. And the family ended up immigrating to Pennsylvania and working in mushroom farms, and would come back on summers and go back and forth. So it had consequences for generations.
That is such an interesting story. How many records did he actually put out?
2 albums.
2 albums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
total of 32 songs. And one of the great regrets that I have is that I know that, for instance, he went to Gennett Records, which was headquartered in Indiana, and produced some songs there that were never released. And one of my biggest regrets is I've not been able to track down where those masters went. To be able to discover, you know, unreleased GB Grayson music would be one of the great finds in music history.
Yeah, I would.
But I haven't had no luck.
Well, I know you're not going to give up. So what's your next venture? What are you going to do next, you think?
So the next venture is working title is to go back and do something to expand the story of Tom Dooley, or Tom Doola, and explore that lover's triangle. And the working title is Guilty or Innocent: The Legend of Tom Dooley. And we're putting together some big names for that, and then once we get kind of a script developed, then to look for financing, and hopefully we plan to start shooting that next summer, next fall.
Will it be more of a documentary than a actor? And
so my plan right now is what I would kind of a hybrid, a docudrama.
Okay.
Where, you know, we do have some what I would call talking heads, you know, experts giving their opinions on, you know, is he innocent, is he guilty, and then maybe some of the key scenes of the story, we have actors act out those scenes just to add a little punchiness, something a little different.
Well, Kelley, we really enjoyed that video, and thank you so much for being here. And it's just a great film to watch. It's very educational, and it's history to find somebody who really, you know, started so much of this, and isn't some famous name in Hollywood. I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the film being selected for your film festival, and I've really enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelley.